office in Smithfield.
Gonna give it another minute. There's just a couple people waiting right now. I'll give it another couple minutes and then let all the guests in, and then we'll get started. Hey, Mila, do you know, I'm not sure if Mila, you know, the Stantec team, Craig Lewis, and Craig Sklenar.
Yeah, I think I was in a meeting with Craig, but I think that's a limit of my introduction. But you know,
when we talked about the BRT, you know, where it was.
Yep, correct.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for being here tonight, Mila. I assume that it's pretty likely we'll get a BRT related question. It's still, I'd say 50-50 when we engage with people. They really want to talk more about the transit itself. And I assume we'll get some of those tonight as well.
Okay, well, luckily our BRT open house wrapped up, but all of the materials are still online, all of the videos. So that would be an easy kind of drop a link for more general information. So yeah.
Yeah, that stuff is great. I think that made it really easy for people to learn a lot about it. Good evening. I want to welcome everybody who's joining. We're going to wait just another minute or two before we get started, but thanks for being here tonight. We'll go through a fairly brief presentation and then have lots of time for questions and answers from y'all. So you can just hang on with us for a minute or two. We'll kick it off. So for those of you joining, we're going to wait just another minute, probably get started at 6:05. A few more people joining, so going to let them get on, and then we'll get started with the short presentation and some questions and answers. Good evening, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and get started. See a few more people are joining and anticipate a couple more people will join as we get going. So this is a meeting to hear from you, hear some questions and provide some answers to you about the process of New Bern Station area planning. And I'm going to start with a presentation to give you a sense of where this project stands and what the goals are. And then we're going to leave plenty of time for a Q&A period. So I am going to share my screen. Y'all able to see that? Can you give me a nod? All right, thank you. So again, welcome to this evening and the discussion. I would love to hear, go ahead and hear from you about where you're coming from. Do you live on the corridor, New Bern Avenue corridor, or work there or elsewhere in Raleigh? You can just drop that in the chat. That would be just nice to know. Also, if you have questions during the presentation, drop it in the chat box. And then when we get to the Q&A period, we will come back and make sure that we get your question answered. So just drop it in there. And if you have any questions about anything, again, just drop it in the chat and one of the city staff or the other project team members will be able to answer that for you. So quick agenda. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the project team with the city, and we have some consultants who are going to help us with this project. Overall, why are we doing this project? What's the reason for taking a look at planning around the BRT, bus rapid transit station areas? Talk about the transit itself and where that project stands. Some recent and pending city work on this issue, a quick update there. And then I'll dive into the goals of this project itself and the schedule. And then finally, next steps and time for Q&A after that. So in terms of the project team, we have several city staff who will be working on this. My name is Jason Harden, and I'm the overall project manager. But we also have project managers who will be working on individual station areas, different groupings of stations. John Anagnos, Matt Clem, Ira Mabel, and Carmen Kwan will all be points of contact along with me going forward. And we also have a consultant team that's going to help us with a lot of the tasks involved with this project, looking at affordable housing currently, doing an inventory of that, looking at pedestrian safety and traffic safety in general, and helping us come up with some recommendations for addressing some of the issues that we know need to be addressed along this corridor. So why this project? So it starts from the fact that the city of Raleigh is investing in a transit service called Bus Rapid Transit. And there are 4 of these BRT corridors that are planned in Raleigh, extending in each direction from downtown Raleigh to the south towards Garner, to the west towards Cary, north along Capitol Boulevard, and then finally this project extending to the east along New Bern Avenue. And it always makes sense when any significant transportation or other public investment is planned to think really closely about other impacts and how we can make sure that that investment provides the biggest benefit possible. So that means with a transit project, it really can increase access to opportunity, jobs, education. It can create or help create vibrant, active, walkable places. And it can provide a big part of the solution towards reducing carbon emissions and other air pollutants along New Bern Avenue and in Raleigh as a whole. And so as in a general sense, what bus rapid transit is it's a higher level of standard bus transportation where, at least for major parts of the corridor, buses have their own space on the roads where there are specialized vehicles that can carry more passengers. Payment happens before passengers get on the bus. You have stations rather than simply stops, and the boarding is level, so people can just roll on or walk on very quickly and easily. And again, the idea of this project is to do some thinking, not just about the transit itself, but the areas around that. And think about opportunities for new housing, for affordable housing, for employment, and to do some very specific planning with the community on how to best achieve some of those goals. So this is, for a moment, I'm going to talk about the transit project itself. And so that is thinking about the stations and the buses and the changes to the streets that will enable bus rapid transit to happen. So again, it extends from downtown Raleigh, from Go Raleigh Station, out along 10 stations, including downtown, past the Beltline, out to New Hope Road, where the Walmart is. And it's about 5 miles, so a pretty long corridor. Most of that, buses will have their own space on the road, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And then where they don't, buses will have signal priority at intersections, which helps them get through the signalized intersection a little bit faster, recognizing the fact that transit is important, transit riders are important, and their time is important. And what we can do to make transit more predictable and efficient for them is going to help make it more usable for riders. So these are the different sections. And I'll note here, because I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, that there's a lot of information on the City of Raleigh's website just about the transit side of things. And if you want to dive into that, if you just search for Raleigh BRT, you'll get to that page, and there is a lot of detailed information that you may want to take a look at. But in a nutshell, there are a couple of different looks that this new Bern BRT corridor will have. So closer to downtown, the buses will be riding in the right lane. It'll be a brightly colored lane along the lines of what you see in that image there. It does also allow cars access to driveways along the way. So in a sense it's shared, but it's primarily for buses. In the center of the corridor, they'll have their own space on the road, right in a transit lane. And that's where there will be stations in the center, and it will really enable those buses to move quickly throughout the corridor. Outside the Beltline, that's where they'll have signal priority. The project is moving along pretty quickly. So it's at what they call 60% design, where it's pretty close to final. There's a few details left to be worked out. That is well underway, getting to a final design. That's when the city will start to acquire any needed right-of-way, any space. There's not a lot of that along the corridor. It would not result in removing houses or buildings, but there are a few places where some property would need to be acquired for a station, let's say. Once that is complete, then construction can begin, looking at 2022, and some work on the street itself, on the station, some utility work. And the goal is to wrap it up and start service by 2024. These are some concepts. These are not final designs, but these are concepts for what these stations generally will look like. I don't expect that they would change too terribly much from what you're seeing here. So again, sheltered, covered, obviously, real-time information about the next bus, so you're not wondering. Having that certainty really helps when there's a wait. It's a lot easier to wait if I know for sure. If it's 4 minutes until the next bus, then even if the bus is coming in 4 minutes, if I don't know, if I have that uncertainty. And then again, the ability to roll right onto the buses will really speed boarding as well. So I want to note a couple of related projects that the city has worked on. Obviously, this is a big investment. It's not just New Bern, it's different corridors and in each directions. And so there's been some thinking already about how best to take advantage of this investment in transit, which is something new for Raleigh. Raleigh traditionally has grown around driving more than around walking or transit. And so we've had some conversations to think about, well, with this investment, how do we take advantage of that? And the big conclusions were to grow more around transit than around driving, as Raleigh's done in the past, and to make sure that the benefits of this investment are shared equitably, and specifically with a big focus on very affordable housing, so that existing residents of New Bern corridor and the other corridors are going to be there to benefit from the transit investment. And I guess there's a lot of details about mixing uses and allowing more housing and employment and better streets, but the big idea from that process was that people are moving to the city of Raleigh and to the region for jobs and opportunity. It's a nice place to live and you can get a job here. And if we don't think about ways to allow people to live and work near walkable places with transit, then two things happen. They have to live in places that aren't walkable and don't have transit. And there's a lot of competition for those relatively few areas where that does exist. And that translates into a much higher carbon footprint because people are having to drive for most trips or all trips, and the trips are longer. Translates into worse health outcomes because, again, walking is not necessarily an option. And it has huge impacts on affordability because there's competition for those, again, those few places where those conditions exist. So this process, thinking about planning around transit and growing around transit, is an opportunity to start solving some of those issues on New Bern and the other corridors. So another way of putting that into practice is a zoning change that would be placed with some discussions as part of this process, but potentially be placed near the station areas along New Bern and the other corridors as well, that would guarantee a higher level of walkability. So no big parking lots, let's say, in between the street and the building, as you can think of along the part of New Bern outside the Beltline. And most related to the idea of affordability, a height bonus for projects that include some deep affordability as part of their development. So a way to ensure, one way to ensure a higher number of affordable units along these corridors. So now talking specifically about this project itself and what the goals are and what we hope to achieve. So one, first and foremost, talk through how, with the community, how we can best start to implement those goals of the equitable development around transit process, have a public outreach process that builds trust, because that doesn't always exist between any city and residents. And it's something that's really important in getting to a good outcome. So that means a lot of outreach. It means that we're going to be thinking about making sure that we're hearing demographically from all sections of this corridor, geographically, in terms of age, whether they rent or own, race. It's very important that we don't just hear from certain groups of people, but hear from all people. The final product can involve regulatory changes, such as zoning changes, affordable housing investments, capital projects that would improve walkability and safety around the stations, and urban design ideas that would help give us a more walkable, more vibrant forum. So a little bit more specifically, looking at different land use types and can I walk, let's say, to a place to get groceries? Can I walk to employment, or do I have to drive? Is there a mix of uses near me? Housing affordability is certainly going to be an absolutely central part of this process. Pedestrian safety, that there are some fairly high-speed streets, some wide intersections, places where it's not very safe or comfortable to walk or bike. That's a hindrance to transit use, because every transit rider is going to be a pedestrian at some point, and lots of people simply want to live a more walkable lifestyle, but may not feel comfortable in doing so. Recognizing and reflecting and celebrating the history and culture of New Bern Avenue. Every part of the city has its own story, and certainly New Bern and this part of Raleigh has a very distinct character, and we want to make sure that that is preserved and enhanced. And then again, recommendations for city investments that can help with those broader goals. In terms of land use, and this is where our consultant team will be critical in helping us look at the demand, what can happen here, what might want to be here in terms of different uses, but perhaps isn't permitted. And then looking with a lot of community input at a future land use map and zoning map that would help enable changes that would meet these goals. In terms of housing and affordability, creating a very detailed inventory of what exists now and starting to try to look into the future and maintain or enhance that level of affordability through some of these tools and investments that we've talked about. And in terms of safety, a concept sometimes called Vision Zero, the idea that it is very possible to drastically reduce the number of fatal or life-changing collisions that occur, particularly with pedestrians, but really road users in general. And it's a matter of priorities, and it's a matter of engineering and design. And there's some opportunities here to bring us closer to that goal through some very focused study and investments. In terms of the schedule, we're at the start. This is where we want to understand the community, understand the goals, take on a project we're calling the Story of New Bern, which is making sure that we understand the history and culture of the area and how it came to be as it is. And with that understood, we can start to work on some potential strategies for addressing those issues. So later on this summer, late summer, early fall, some design workshops where we'll dive deeply into what can be done to improve this intersection, or is the zoning close to my house right to allow me to be able to walk to get groceries? Questions like those. Wrapping up and concluding with a presentation of these recommendations early next year, and finally delivering this to City Council with recommendations for city investments and zoning and other changes that would help this become a reality. So in terms of next steps, it is basically we're still in the learning phase. So we need to hear from you all. We have a survey that's live that asks some questions that will again help us understand what to focus on very specifically. I'll show you the link in just a second. We also have a very active project page that provides information about not just this project, but has links to bus rapid transit in general, and a lot of information available about that. You can help us tell that story of New Bern Avenue. We are very interested. If you would like to do an interview and provide your perspective, then let us know. We can set that up. And we want to hear from a real spectrum of voices in that project. Again, the workshops in September and some walking and biking on the street workshops later on as well. So with that, that's all I really wanted to present formally. I want to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other and hear from you as far as questions that you have about this process or anything else.
I have a question.
Please.
So I live on Lord Ashley Road, and I live right down, it's just down from New Bern Avenue, a couple houses down. And so, I've been following this process. It seemed like a couple years ago when you guys were doing some brainstorming and all that kind of stuff. And I've tried to go to some meetings and stay up to date, but last year I probably didn't hear as much. But anyway, as I've been listening lately and learning more and more and hearing more and more and realizing more and more changes that are coming to the area, I just have a couple of questions and concerns. And so I was trying to really listen and have an open mind. That's what I'm trying to do. So probably my biggest concern being here in the Longview Gardens neighborhood is the zoning changes. That's probably out of everything, my biggest concern. The other thing is I hate that all those trees are going to be removed on our median, because I think that's what makes it so beautiful going down New Bern Avenue and just makes it feel like such a special place. I'm not sure how you guys are going to incorporate that, but even when I count, it's like, it's well over 150 trees from Wake Med all the way up, nice mature trees. And they add a lot. Like even when I just drive down the road, it adds a lot. And so now I envision a lot more concrete and cement and different things like that that aren't very welcoming and stuff, but it is what it is. So I don't know how you guys are going to incorporate, trees and that kind of thing into the landscape. And I don't know if it's even possible when you're taking a median out. I saw a photo there that has like 2 lanes for buses and then trees on each side, but I'm not really sure how that would be possible. And then my other concern, it seems like I have another concern, but maybe it'll come back to me. But most importantly is the zoning. And what are you guys thinking here? Because I know that we had this historic overlay in our neighborhood that gave us some protection, not a lot, but it did give us some protection on subdividing lots and things like that. And I also think that this whole area has a variety of housing options for people. So that's another question I have, because I sell real estate, so I know a good bit about the prices of everything. I don't know how you can make it, I mean, when you say more affordable, what we have right now is about as affordable as it can get. And then my question really is like, what are you guys going to do to the larger lots, like to allow, like, are you going to allow developers to come in here and say, my neighbor sells his house and, oh, let's throw up a triplex or, something like that. That's not what the neighborhood, that's not the landscape of the neighborhood is not that. And so that's why we're here, because we wanted our large lots, and I've been here for 15 years. So can you address that for me?
Sure. Let me.
Can I interrupt for a second? Can I speak on what Tanya just said? Because she covered a lot of the ground that I was going to cover. And just, if you don't mind, before you answer her, I just kind of want to add to that just a little bit. The New Bern Avenue corridor from downtown to the Beltline, you can say you can break it up into 3 or 4 different zones, but these zones are very different along that corridor. The corridor that Tanya's talking about, let's say, is from King Charles to Sunnybrook. You can go a little bit past Sunnybrook, but essentially from King Charles to Sunnybrook. Those tree lines, those streets that line the trees in the median are one of the things that myself and my neighbors value the most. And as briefly as I can state, sacrificing that median for the BRT is not only is it not necessary, but it's a mistake and it's a waste of money. Now, when you go from King Charles down New Bern to Raleigh Boulevard, we got the Milton Presbyterian Church, which is going to be developed by the DHIC as a 4-story affordable unit, affordable senior living complex. So that's filling an affordable housing need. Duplex Village, I believe, has been partially bought by the city. At one point, they wanted a 10-unit, 5-story complex in Duplex Village. There was pushback by the community, and that project was on the back burner. So with a current city council and a current mayor who I believe is overly friendly to development, what assurances do we have? And I'm not asking you this question, but what assurances that we have that it's not that BRT is not a bait and switch to get that kind of construction coming through? What Tanya mentioned about the houses and the big lots along the corridor, I'm not expecting protection that a developer can't come in and, like she says, can build 3 houses or a triplex or some other project like the Longview, John Kane's proposed project for the Longview, which is not the worst project. I mean, because that is vacant land, and you can fit, I guess, a 4-story luxury townhome complex in that unit. Other than that, and then there's the DMV, which is state property, and the development is coming along the pipe. And then you include Tower Shopping Center and Beacon Plaza on the outside of the Beltline, which is a wonderful opportunity for mixed-use development, market rate, and affordable development. There's a lot of land back there that's not being used, that hasn't been used in 20 years. So there's alternatives between, if we look at sections like from downtown to Tarboro Road, from Tarboro Road to Raleigh Boulevard, a little sort of semi-section between Raleigh Boulevard and King Charles, and then a third section that is from King Charles to Sunnybrook. If the BRT can be tweaked in order to accommodate the different needs and different concerns for each section, instead of a one-size-fits-all with a highway that's coming through, tearing down the trees, which is not going to improve the carbon footprint, and it's not going to make the bus system itself better. So what would be better for us as neighbors is if we had a safe cycling, walking, mixed use asphalt walkway on either side of New Bern, going from Sunnybrook to downtown, so that we would have the choice of walking, riding the bus, or riding our bike. I think that'd be a lot less expensive than tearing up the road and putting essentially creating a 4 or 5 lane highway down the corridor of New Bern Avenue, which I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of my neighbors are not in favor of that. And I don't think that anything that the city has explained to us has convinced us that we will benefit or that's going to enhance our quality of life. And thank you for letting me say my piece.
Absolutely. Thank you for providing your thoughts. So 2 questions there. I'm going to answer the zoning question first. And we also have on the call Mila Vega from our transit division. She just waved, and I'll let her take the other half of the question about trees and landscaping along the corridor. So the zoning question, honestly, the short and kind of easy answer to that is that's what this process is for. That it is to, in a very detailed way, have conversations to think through with community residents and stakeholders, the pros and cons and the trade-offs of different scenarios. And one thing to always keep in mind is even not doing a plan, not having a conversation, it doesn't mean that changes don't happen. It just means that you may get requests to change zoning and there's not really an established vision in place that is going to be the result of this process. The second one goes back to those trade-offs, the big picture trade-offs about the future of Raleigh and how it grows and whether we accommodate more, allow more people to live in walkable places near transit, or whether they live in places that aren't walkable and aren't served by transit. But there's lots of different ways to do that. There's what Mr. Scott was just referring to, the idea sometimes called missing middle housing, which is housing types in between like a multi-story apartment building and a detached house. Those housing types are pretty common in older parts of Raleigh, Oakwood, Boylan Heights, lots of neighborhoods near downtown actually. So a triplex is a great example of one. And so those can allow households, different households that have different needs, maybe don't need the yard, maybe empty nesters looking to downsize a little bit, but not move out of the neighborhood. Provide them an option and still retain that same scale and rhythm of an existing neighborhood with the houses. So that's something that certainly will be explored as a part of this process. And then closer to the stations themselves, there's the opportunity to think about allowing something a little bit more within a very short walk of the stations. But again, going back to that short answer, that is exactly this process. It's exactly this conversation, and particularly those workshops in late summer are going to be where a lot of the real details are up for discussion. And I should note those will be logistics to be worked out, but I'm certain that they will involve both an in-person element for people who like that and also an online component for people who find it easier or preferable to engage that way. So a lot of engagement coming up on that question. And I heard another question coming, but I do want Mila to have a chance to respond to the other half of that question.
Yes, thank you, Jason. I will start with the lanes and kind of the tailored approach to mixing and matching BRT infrastructure. So when we first kicked off 0 to 30% design, oh gosh, probably at this point, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we went through at each phase like 0%, 5%, 10%, and 30%. At about 0 to 5, we had several options for runway types, and we brought it to the public and we said, okay, BRT can be on the curb, running alongside of the curb, essentially it can be in the median. We can do a mixed traffic where we can't accommodate BRT lanes, but maybe use some technology to keep buses moving through. and not get stuck, behind the traffic lights, and basically at least try to make it, more reliable. We kind of did pros and cons for all of those essential menu options. And from the transit perspective, it is always better to have a fully exclusive lane, which the only way you can get it is to have the transit way, with that section that we have between Pool Road and Sunnybrook, where BRT is essentially running in its own facility, because it eliminates conflicts with driveways. It eliminates conflicts with cars needing to, say, merge into BRT lane and then take right into a driveway, into maybe a parking or into a business. So from transit perspective, this is the best and the highest accommodation you can have. And we also, while we are building this system for BRT, obviously dedicated infrastructure, BRT or not, emergency vehicles could use that whenever they want. So that gives them full exclusivity of access. And we also will be starting to look at some operating standards and see if there are scenarios where we can also funnel other non-BRT vehicles. Maybe it's an express route that, say, Go Triangle operates and doesn't need to stop at BRT stations, but it can use the infrastructure to bypass traffic. We'll be assessing those situations. And then once we move to borders like Western and Southern, we'll be looking at if we can do similar partnership with Town of Cary. So again, from the transit perspective, it's highest and best accommodation. And anytime there's an available right of way, that's the best investment for transit you can make. As far as the trees, yes, the trees will get impacted. And yes, we will not be able to replant large trees like you see trees today, and this is unfortunate. It is always difficult to make the transition, but what we are trying to do is to build a truly urban walkable corridor. There was a comment made about enhanced bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. So during the early version of the design, again, when we were kind of going through cycling through all these different concepts, where do we want BRT in the center, on the curb, on different placement, we had some pedestrian accommodations, but not as much as what we currently have. So as we received public feedback, and there was a lot of interest in having a definitely higher investment in bike and ped infrastructure. So we ended up including sidewalk on one side of the project and multi-use path on the other side of the project. And Jason is showing that clip. So that multi-use path, it starts from downtown and runs all the way to Sunnybrook. And I think it's 11, 12 feet. So it goes a little bit wider and narrower in certain areas to stay within the right of way. But that accommodation was made after we received public feedback that, more infrastructure is needed to make it happen. Again, we are trying to keep this project within the right of way. So by adding all the different components, something has to go. What we are trying to do is we are working with a landscape architect and trying to figure out, okay, what can we do? We want to make sure that the corridor, after we are done with the project, it will feel different, but we still want it to be inviting and beautiful. We do need to comply with NCDOT regulations as far as the height of trees that will be allowed in the corridor. So we're kind of working for that and looking maybe potentially at some more native species to diversify the plant palette. So we don't have specific details yet, but we will try to, we will be landscaping the corridor, and yes, there won't be mature large trees, but at the extent possible, what is allowed, we will incorporate in the project to our best ability. And I think I've covered all of the questions. I've covered the runways, I've covered the multi-use path, and I've covered the trees. Jason, let me know if I missed anything.
I think that was everything, but I would see if there's some follow-up questions.
I have one more. It's kind of a comment, not so much a question. There's not a stoplight between Sunnybrook and, I'm sorry, there's only one stoplight at Donald Ross Drive between King Charles and Sunnybrook. So as far as anything that would hold up traffic, whether the bus is on the median lane or it's on the existing 2 lanes going in opposite directions, it's essentially taking the same path, and there's nothing to impede that path like a stoplight, except at one part. So again, the different segments of the New Bern corridor and what is needed for each section is different. And in that section between Sunnybrook and King Charles, additional stops are not needed. A more efficient traffic flow is not needed because all the traffic is moving at the same speed, save one stoplight. So when the comment that she made about with existing plans, something needs to go, I think that the plans need to change and the trees need to stay. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Hi, I'm a resident of New Bern also. I have the same concerns. When I first heard about the BRT coming to New Bern as the first arm of the artery, I thought it was a strange choice because it was the only one that has trees and the only one that doesn't have sidewalks. And so of course, to me, when I look at the project, I think, well, great, well, I'm gonna get a sidewalk and I'm gonna get like a greenway type of thing. And that sounds really positive to me. What's concerning to me, besides losing the trees, of course, is and adding the dedicated lane, which I think is just a lot of asphalt in addition to losing the trees, is the zoning overlay. It sounded like you were sort of mentioning it, that it had sort of 2 pros. One is that you can add this additional layer of height for affordability, that'd be sort of like a bonus. And that the other piece was, remind me, what was the other piece? Oh, the parking, right? The requirements for that you wouldn't be allowed to park, you would have to pull it up.
That's definitely part of it, is to not require those levels of parking in a place where there's walkability and transit. I think the other big piece is looking at more residential areas with residential zoning and allowing at that same scale those so-called missing middle housing types, your duplex, triplex, quadplex.
So that was my main concern, is that I think that zoning is so strict. We don't have walkability off of New Bern very well either, because we don't, unlike all the other arteries, there are no sidewalks off of New Bern, at least through much of our stretch. So what I'm thinking is likely to happen, I'm just imagining the future, is when we do have the BRT and we only have it in this stretch, that there may be people that park on the side streets to take the BRT downtown as a convenience to avoid paying for parking downtown. And because we don't have sidewalks and we don't really have transit that goes, I mean, the sort of the smaller feeder side, I think it doesn't exist. So unless you live on New Bern, I don't see how you access it very easily. You can't walk to it very conveniently in a lot of stretches. Certainly, I shouldn't walk down some of these streets. It's not safe, I don't think. The sidewalk doesn't exist. And so I think that what's going to happen is that people are going to maybe park along the side streets, which can cause problems, I think, for neighbors, but also if you don't allow parking in the zoning, could cause like sort of greater issues. I mean, if you're that restrictive about the zoning.
Yeah, just to clarify, and I understand the question, it wouldn't be not allowing parking, it would just not forcing parking to be provided. So actually most projects, virtually all projects in the city of Raleigh, there's a minimum amount of parking that's required. Virtually all of them actually provide more than that. So it's not that they would be restricted from providing parking or that they wouldn't provide any, but not forcing them necessarily to require as much. In terms of your comment about getting to the stations, again, that's absolutely a part of this process, is to make this a successful project, a successful transit investment. We want it to be easy and safe and comfortable for people, you know, within that 5 or even 10-minute walk from a station, to be able to get there and not have to worry so much about the speed of the cars or crossing a really wide and uncomfortable intersection. And they're all over the place here. They're all over the place, all over the city of Raleigh, for that matter. But this is a place where it absolutely makes sense. And part of this project will be prioritizing investments that make it more comfortable for people to walk here. Frankly, regardless of whether or not they're BRT riders, that will be a benefit for residents and employees of this area. And maybe
So the goal would
also
be to,
just to not lose your earlier question, I want to make sure I get that as well. The question about would people park, and maybe Mila can jump in with this, but would people park to be able to ride BRT the rest of the way into downtown? I can say that the station on the end of the line, the eastern end, outside the belt line, is going to be a park and ride facility. So that's a natural one for people in, say, Nightdale or even North Raleigh, if they want to come in there and jump on that and get downtown really quick and not have to pay for parking. I do think that's a consideration. That's designed for that. Whether or not there might be some smaller areas reserved at the other stations, I don't know if there's been some consideration about that, but maybe Mila could add a little bit more on that overall topic about parking at stations.
can I just clarify one thing that you said? So is the future goal then to invest more on the side streets, like they would get sidewalk where there isn't any? That would be sort of
Yes.
wrapped into this?
Absolutely, 100%. So
Okay.
there's actually two parallel tracks of planning that are happening now. One is what Mila is essentially in charge of, which is designing the transit itself, the stations, procuring the buses, redesigning the street. And that is pretty close to a conclusion. The alignment is set, the basic design is set, some details to be worked out. But that is focused on New Bern itself, or New Bern and Edenton in the sections near downtown. What we're going to be looking at here is a lot bigger than that. It's looking at Raleigh Boulevard, it's looking at Clarendon Crescent, it's looking at all these side streets or connecting streets, Pool Road, that are in some cases very uncomfortable for people walking, and looking, again, if we're investing, and we are investing in transit along New Bern Avenue, it sort of requires a higher level of investment in nearby areas to get that pedestrian friendliness up to where it needs to be to support the transit investment and transit ridership. So yes, absolutely looking at stuff beyond New Bern Avenue.
So as far as parking, yes, Jason, you're correct. So there will be a park and ride facility at the end of the line. It's a separate project. It's called East Raleigh Transit Center. Looks like the projects are pretty well aligned as far as the schedule, so they should both come online at the same time. But even if they don't, and say BRT gets ahead, while we're still working on that East Raleigh Transit Center, we are looking at opportunities to rent spaces. There's a lot of parking in that, at the end of the line. Lots of payment where we can just rent spaces for people and then establish a park and ride lot while we are, finishing East Raleigh Transit Center. As far as, so that's the only area where we're looking at, establishing park and ride presence along New Bern. We also obviously will have the multi-use path, and there we will be installing bike racks along the corridor so people can potentially bike to the station. They can leave a bike at the station, or the buses that we will be ordering will accommodate bikes actually inside. So it will speed up the process. The person would not need to, get in front of the bus, secure the bike on the bus. You can essentially just roll in, and there will be a bike rack on the inside of the bus at the back, where you can just have your bike with you. So just kind of give that flexibility for the first mile and last mile. I know it's not ideal because we don't have all of the pedestrian accommodations on day one, but as Jason said, there's not this current process that we'll be looking at assessing those gaps.
I have another question. I remembered some of the things that I was thinking about, and when you guys started talking about parking and riding into downtown, it made me, it helped me remember. So what's like the purpose? Like you're talking about riding into downtown. That's all I'm hearing. So I guess if you want to go somewhere else, you got to make a connection. Or the purpose of this isn't necessarily for commuters, right? Because how do you get out to the RTP? Or commuters coming in from Johnston County? That would be awesome to have a dedicated lane for these buses on I-40 coming in, wouldn't it? Or on Wade Avenue going out to the park. So what is it to go? I live, you know, we're used to downtown. What is it down there that people are going to go to? Or is it to connect somewhere? I mean, and that's going to take years of changing people's mindset, I think. But what is it downtown? Because there's bars, there's expensive restaurants, there's a couple of museums. They're not huge, but there's not a lot of things going on. You might have some festivals, but is this just for entertainment purposes? I would think it would be for commuting, because you do have a lot of, you know, businesses downtown, but I don't necessarily see those folks living down this corridor this way, or the other ones, you know, even those. I don't really see that. Does that make sense? Because help me understand. If I can understand the value, then it's going to be, but what I hear you saying is we want to stack people on top of this area. We want to change this, make it high density. Because all these people are going to go downtown or wherever. And is that really realistic? And I mean, if I can understand that, that's what I'm trying to do, is to understand that. But I think we all know we want the trees, unfortunately. So, but like, what are we doing downtown? You guys know what it's like down there. I mean, and I've been here 15 years, and it went way up, and then it's kind of gone down. And I mean, I guess if you want to go drink and stay out, you know, late at night, but there's no theaters. I mean, you can go to, we've got some, you know, arts and things like that, you know, some musicals and ballet and stuff, but I'm not going to ride a bus down there. I mean, a lot of other people might, but, you know, I wouldn't do that. But we just don't have enough of that. And it's not, I just don't think you're going to increase the population in this section that's going to go down there. And the middle housing, I'm not sure, like the cost of the property that builder would have to pay, and then to build, it'd have to be multiple things to make it. I'm not sure what when you say middle housing, I'm not sure what you exactly mean by that in terms of dollar amounts. That's what I'm trying to figure out too. So help me understand, because my husband works in near Durham. What good is it going to do? You know, I guess he can catch another transit bus down there, but my goodness, why would we want to do that? We can just get in our car and be on our own schedule. And, you know, I guess it's a different mindset, but Raleigh is not like this huge city, and we are spread out. And that's kind of what happens. So now it's like you're trying to bring it in and kind of justify this BRT. And I don't see it as helping commuters. That's, you know, go out on 40 in the morning or in the afternoon on 40 East. That's where they need this, you know. Don't you think? Does that make any sense?
So I understand.
Agree. I think you should put a light rail down the middle of 40.
Actually, if I could finish, please.
Mhm.
There are quite a few jobs in downtown Raleigh, and not to mention in Wake Med itself. You may have people commuting from other parts of the corridor to Wake Med, but you also have to look to the fact that this will connect to 3 other similar corridors that then start to connect to NC State, south to Garner, to Cary. There's a lot of employment along these areas, and also the fact that bus routes throughout the city of Raleigh will connect to this. So with the frequency that this provides, it suddenly makes a transfer a lot more feasible, because you know you're not going to have to wait very long, and you can look up and see that the bus is going to be there in a few minutes. So in terms of allowing transit riders access to jobs, it vastly expands the number of jobs that they can reach within a relatively reasonable amount of time. So I'd let Mila add to that, but it certainly is something that will be, we believe, useful for all users, whether they're going downtown for entertainment. But I think employees and commuters are going to be among the biggest users.
Thanks, Jason. Yes, this project is really the first out of 4 legs that were identified in the original plan. And they will intersect in downtown Raleigh. Ultimately, Western Corridor that we are currently getting to about, we just bypass 5% design, we get into 10. That corridor will connect to Raleigh Union Station, the future bus facility, so it kind of links to the larger transit network that way, multimodal network. As we're building out the system, and we have Eastern, which is New Bern, Southern, going to Garner, Western, Northern lines, we'll start looking at interlining them, so they will not be functioning as separate, essentially, projects. We could interline and connect Eastern maybe to Western line. This way you can get one seat ride through downtown all the way to downtown Cary. Or maybe if we need to do origin and destination study first to figure out what makes the most sense, maybe we can connect Eastern going to Garner. So there's the one seat ride that is included, and the goal is to get that built out by 2030. So you have essentially a network of BRT projects through downtown Raleigh. As Jason pointed out, there is a large network of 15-minute frequency routes that will also serve and link into the network, essentially act like feeder services. And then beyond that, Tony mentioned RTP. There are 2 extensions that are currently planned, and the major investment study is being kicked off to better understand what they could look like. One extension is to Morrisville, potential RTP, and then another extension to Johnston County. So ultimately, once all that, and those extensions are actually funded through state transportation improvement program. We just need to do a little bit more work before we're ready to actually implement them. But the goal is to get them in revenue 2 years after the main line is open. Say Western is open, and then 2 years after that, the extension opens up. So there's definitely that larger plan to connect the region and to connect at the larger network, not just one leg. This is just our first step to really have to start somewhere.
And I would also just add quickly, the routes that were analyzed for bus rapid transit basically follow the existing highest ridership route. So we know these are places where people want to and do use transit to get around. It's simply building on that and providing those riders with an even higher level of service, and hopefully enticing some new riders as well.
There's a lot of development out Pool Road and out that way. And, you know, I've had some experiences trying to help some folks that I know to get to places that didn't have a car. And here's their challenge was there was very little bus service out that way that they knew about, or that, you know, you'd have to get up super early in the morning to get to a bus stop to then catch another bus, then go to another bus. So it's, you know, and currently I think this is what y'all are trying to fix, is that currently it's very difficult to ride a bus. So y'all are trying to make it easy and convenient and fast. But here's the question is, the areas that really need, that have high density, there's a lot of neighborhoods out that way, more so than down New Bern Avenue, and they're already there. So you don't have to build more middle housing in our neighborhood and rezone this area. Like Mr. Scott said, you're already building some of this stuff already. And as I know, back in our neighborhood, we have a lot of homes that are, you know, smaller homes, were affordable at one point. But my point is that, what about those areas that really, like for us, it's an option. Oh, do I want to take the bus or no? No, I've got a car. I'm going to take my car today. Some folks don't even have that option. I wonder how many people along this New Bern Avenue corridor have it and are going to have it, or is it just a convenience and an option that you guys are giving everyone instead of filling a need for people who really need that connection? So, and I remember, like, when we were doing some group work with, you know, ideas for this a couple years ago, they were talking about, I believe, like Pool Road and I don't know, maybe I'm not really sure, because that's in this general area. And it seemed like there was you know, some interest in all that. And I thought that could have been part of this transit system. Is it?
Can I ask a clarifying question really quickly? I'm John Agnost. I work for the city as well. I'm one of the planners for this process. You mentioned some higher density housing along Pool Road. Do you mind just describing what you think of when you were to saying higher density? Can you
Well,
describe that in a little more detail? What kind of housing you're?
My definition of higher density are in neighborhoods that have like a lot of houses, there are apartments, there's townhomes, and it keeps going out further and further. You know, I drive down there and then you go off Barrow Road and we got Battle Ridge. I think that's the name of it. Huge subdivision that seemed to need a little more bus service, because that's where this young man, I was trying to help get places, and I'd go out there and pick him up. And his dilemma was he didn't have a car.
Can I ask one more?
So that's what I'm talking about when I say high density. And if you guys are talking about like, I don't know what your high density and my high density are, but that's a lot of people down that road, and you can look at the traffic. And if you go down that road during any rush hour, you will see the traffic on that road, and it is backed up. That would be ideal to help eliminate some of that traffic. New Bern Avenue, I go off that road all the time, and it is rare that I have to wait very much to get out on the road. So I would think that the transit thing is supposed to help. It's supposed to help eliminate, or not eliminate, but help folks give, help with in the traffic and all that. It sounds like all we want to do is like provide a way to get downtown and do what?
If I may, I'd like to just ask one more follow-up question, which is the person you were helping on Pool Road, do you think if they could afford to live near New Bern Avenue and this BRT service, do you think they would prefer to live there, or do you think they would stay along Pool Road?
They didn't live on Pool Road. They lived out in the Battle Ridge neighborhood. It's a nice neighborhood. They love living out there. That's just it. People they want to live. They don't necessarily want to live this close, but no, the family likes it out there. They moved out there to get away from this type of thing, but they don't have a car, so it was just a challenge. It was just a challenge all the time. So, that's my thought too. It's like, I would dare say for almost everybody along this road, it's an option. It's, we all have cars, bikes, but you don't want to ride a bike on Pool Road. A moped's kind of tough too, but you could do it. And I'm using Pool Road as an example because it runs parallel. I'm not necessarily parallel, but it's in our region here. So I'm just trying to understand. I know you guys are doing it, but just help me understand the logic here. It's like, how do we get folks that don't have them as much transportation options as we do? How do we really serve those folks?
I don't know how many people on this panel actually take the bus, but I live near Wake Med. If I wanted to go to Rex Hospital, I would have to go downtown, get a transfer, and transfer to the Rex Hospital bus. What Mila said earlier about connecting lines and getting out of the old spoke model where all the lines go into downtown, a lot of people don't want to go downtown. They want to go to other parts of the city. And it would be nice if they could circumvent downtown and go directly to those parts of the city. What Mila said about different configurations of the bus line that are coming down the road in 22 or 21, it seems that you're doing it backwards. And instead of creating more of a highway going into downtown, which seems less pedestrian friendly, it makes sense to me that you create more options for avoiding downtown for the people who do not live downtown and do not work downtown. As far as whether people go downtown for entertainment, culture, that's a whole different concept. But getting Monday through Friday, getting from home to work, it is not necessarily that everybody go through the downtown corridors, regardless of which direction they're coming from, in order to get to work. So it seems like before X amount of hundreds of millions of dollars are spent tearing up the road, that more research could be done by making the existing bus patterns more efficient, moving people around and avoiding downtown altogether.
Well, it's definitely true that not every trip goes downtown. And I do want to back up just a little bit in terms of talking about transit improvements. This is one out of a number of improvements that Wake County determined to fund in 2016 when voters approved the transit sales tax. So one of those big ideas was the idea of bus rapid transit. The other was rail, regional rail from Garner to downtown Raleigh out to Durham. That's also being planned. But a big one that addresses, I think, the last two comments is the idea of just increasing bus frequency throughout the city. And so some of those routes have already started to, those frequency increases have already started to happen. But there's a term in the transit planning world, frequency is freedom. And the idea is, if you have to wait 30 or 60 minutes for a bus, that starts to really eat up your day, and the transfer time almost makes a transfer undoable. If you are waiting 15 minutes or less, that's what we tend to call frequent, then all of a sudden it just opens up worlds. And a transfer, even if it's downtown, can suddenly link you to places you really couldn't feasibly get to before. And so again, some of those frequency increases have already happened. Some of the routes and route planning does involve thinking about so-called crosstown routes that don't necessarily go downtown. Raleigh's geography and topography makes that a little bit difficult compared to, say, one of the older cities with a giant grid. A lot of routes basically just roads do run downtown, and there's fewer crosstown routes, but that is a part of the bus planning. So a lot of these things are happening that for the average bus rider are going to be beneficial. But going back to New Bern and BRT, again, that is one of, we know the demand is there because that is the second, Mila, correct me if I'm wrong, but second highest ridership route. So that a route that we already know serves the hospital, serves downtown, is used by a lot of people. I've ridden that many times, and it is usually a busy bus. And that made sense to prioritize to get these existing riders an even better level of service.
Can I jump in for a moment?
John, yes.
I just wanted to touch on the fact that I heard the term highway used 2 or 3 times at this point to describe the future state of New Bern Avenue. I do want to be very clear that, if anything, the way that New Bern operates currently is somewhat like a highway. And one person mentioned that there are very few traffic signals for portions of it, and that in fact, people are capable of just driving the speed limit or in excess of the speed limit at will, at their leisure, down large stretches of this portion of New Bern Avenue. That's how a highway functions. So I want it to be clear that one of the points of this process is actually to reduce that quality of New Bern Avenue, to make it operate less like a highway and more like a city street, where it is safe and comfortable for a pedestrian to walk along and to cross New Bern Avenue. So I hope that there's not a conception that there's a desire that there's a desire as part of this process to make New Bern operate like a highway, because it's actually just the opposite.
I'm sorry, but how does a center lane accomplish that?
I think that's a really good question that gets into the heart of what this process is all about. So bus rapid transit is a high quality transit service that in and of itself is more comfortable for riders because of the station platforms instead of bus stops with a bench and shelter. The other part of it is that this process itself will be a way that you, the community, can work with us in the city to design pedestrian crossings, so crosswalks and waiting areas for pedestrians that go from the outside of New Bern Avenue, where the shops and potentially in the future more residential units will be, to the center of New Bern where that station is. And so that's going to involve the complete redesign of some of these intersections. with very large, wide pedestrian crossings in some cases, and special signal timing. So those are the kind of things that we want to have a conversation with you about. We want to, when we get to the later parts of this process, we're going to sit down and look at diagrams and look at maps. We're going to say, how can this intersection feel more comfortable? What could be different about this intersection where you would say, I would feel great about walking to that median, to that BRT platform?
Hey, John, I really appreciate your point. I think conceptually, one thing that's really important for the designers to lock onto is, I agree with you that I live on New Bern, and New Bern, there's people who are speeding excessively. So in that definition, it's a highway. I think a lot of times people are using the term highway. And for those of you who have said it, I don't want to speak for them. But for me, I think it's because all of a sudden we have gone from a 4-lane road that is tree covered. If you drive down New Bern Avenue, you are driving under trees. And that is not going to exist anymore. All of a sudden it is going to go from, you know, let's say 100 feet wide between trees to maybe 300 feet wide between trees. And so, because not only are we going to lose the trees down the median, but it's very likely we're going to lose the big significant trees on people's property who are going to be damaged by the construction, the sidewalk coming, all of it. I think you guys are well aware that pretty much, you know, the city property butts up to everyone's tree lines. And even though those trees are on our property, it's very likely we'll lose these 70, 80-year-old trees. So not only are we losing the trees in the middle, but we're losing the trees on the border. And so just the vision of a highway, the fact that a highway is usually very open, there's no greenery, and it's a huge concern that's been expressed a couple of times that just the image of what we're dealing with is going to be significantly different. So I just wanted to kind of, I think that's one of the reasons people are using the term highway, because we're not driving under trees anymore. It's going to be very massively open.
I would add that if you follow the TOD zoning changes that we're now at however many stories plus extra, then I'm envisioning, and I've driven home every day since I've heard the TOD thing and tried to imagine the tunnel on both sides with no trees in the middle. And that's going to be a huge change for all of us. And I think in a lot of ways a loss.
I definitely understand that. And also, Steve, to your comment, I threw up the picture not to sidetrack from the discussion about trees. And I'll bring that back up because I wanted to go back to the question of the pedestrian friendliness of what's being designed. The trees are important. There's no question about it. And that, again, is something that we can take a look at through this process. Now, that would focus, again, the transit design as a different process, and that's well on its way. But in terms of the question, the comment just previously had to do with what about new development? Because there will be some along this corridor no matter what. What kind of goals do we want to set for the trees and landscaping and the look of that new development? That is the kind of question that this process is suited to diving into pretty deeply. If anybody's ever been involved in a discussion about, like, let's say a rezoning, some of these same conversations still happen, but they don't have the ability to step back and think about broader goals and pros and cons and have a lot of conversation. It's kind of pressured and heated, and oftentimes the results are not necessarily satisfying to anybody involved. There will be requests along this corridor at different places to change the zoning, and there probably will be some of those conversations, but this is the opportunity, while kind of the pressure is not on, to have these deeper discussions about our goals and thinking through, you know, competing values and different interests and how best to resolve them all, and as close to hopefully a win-win solution as we can get. So I guess I feel like a little bit of a broken record, but these questions are exactly what we want to hear tonight, exactly the kind of topics that we need to know, that we need to focus on during this process. And that's what we're going to solve during these conversations. So actually, I'm going to bring up just really quickly an example of what the crosswalk would look like, because there was the question about, you know, how comfortable and friendly would it be for pedestrians? So much wider, more visible crosswalks, a refuge island in the middle, and along with the enhanced or new sidewalks or multi-use path, a pretty significant upgrade to pedestrian comfort and walkability in the area. We just keep hearing from people, whether it's about this project or just in general, that they are really hungry for walkability, that cars are a great tool, but people kind of wish they weren't always having to use them for every trip, especially short trips. And so this is a way to improve that walkability, to make it easier to get to, say, Longview Shopping Center, to have dinner or whatever you want to do. I mean, there's a lot of goals here. Obviously, making it better for people commuting on transit is one, but there's other goals that this project can help address as well. So I'm going to stop sharing. I think there's another question in the chat about increased water runoff. So I'll let Mila address whether there's anything specific as part of the BRT plans that would address that. But I can say that, one, the city recently and its stormwater regulations with respect to floodplains. And two, with any new development, and this wasn't the case when most older neighborhoods in Raleigh were built, where there was really little, if any, consideration of stormwater. New projects are required to retain any addition in stormwater on their property, and it can only be released gradually. And so anything that changes along that corridor has to adhere to those much tighter stormwater regulations. Let Mila add anything if there's something relevant to the BRT project itself along those lines about stormwater.
Yes, we will be upgrading stormwater infrastructure. Obviously, there are some serious issues, and it gets problems with flooding, especially around Raleigh Boulevard, for example. So we will be increasing that infrastructure. There will be a segment of green stormwater infrastructure, so trying to be a little bit more kind of innovative and environmentally friendly, and not necessarily just go everywhere with traditional green stormwater infrastructure. We're also looking at potentially trying to figure out how we can capture stormwater from stations and maybe funnel them into the either green stormwater infrastructure, tie them into the upgraded system, even if it's traditional. So definitely looking at fixing flooding issues and dealing with stormwater. That's a large component of the project. It was from day one.
Any other questions that folks have? Gloria?
If I may chime in for a second, I'm a long-term resident of Raleigh and now current resident of another resident of Southeast Raleigh, where I'm originally from. And I'm a former business owner of 88 Paratransit Transportation Company. So I've seen a lot of growth and a lot of movement around transportation through Raleigh, as well as my father was a capital area transit bus driver for over 20 years and retired from CAT transportation. One of my major concerns that I see is 88 Paratransit access from their homes to those locations to be able to commute within Raleigh downtown, or even just perhaps from a leisure standpoint, accessing those bus transits to go outbound, Tower Shopping Center, Beacon Plaza, those type of places. I'm all for the bus lane, the new bus lane, BTR transit. I think one major concern probably of a lot of your residents within Southeast Raleigh and seeing this come to fruition is how beneficial is it to them? Of course, we know some of the things that are taking place gentrification wise in the downtown area, which I don't want to really get into, but it does play a part, and it's very interesting now that this has become a part of Raleigh's purview to put into place. So I guess the sentiment that I'm hearing from a lot of residents is that you almost feel like you're being tested on, you're being tested with this model, not really taking in consideration the benefit perhaps this will have on, you know, long-term residents of that side of Raleigh. Like I said, coming into Raleigh, and I know historically Raleigh has been very conservative transportation-wise. The powers that be, for some reason, have not allowed light rail to come into play within Raleigh and the Triangle area. And that's been decades of power that has allowed that not to come into play. And now that it's become a necessity, and you really become an obsolete city if you don't put into place these things. It's now more of a priority to put something in place. And it's, again, people in this area feel like they're being tested, like this model is being tested on their side of town in which they grew up on, which now they can't afford a lot of the houses in the area. There's still a lot of elderly residents that still live in the area, a lot of parents, aunts and uncles that still reside in those areas. And they're not really necessarily going to be able to utilize the transportation. And so I don't know, it just was very interesting that that the rapid bus transit, and I actually would like to see it be light rail opposed to the actual buses, but I know the costs associated with that, the millions of dollars that would cost, and this is sort of would be a gateway into that in the future. But that was just my take on it, and I'm hoping that you guys take in consideration ADA paratransit clients. There's a lot of visually impaired, handicapped, elderly people that would love access and need that access to get to jobs that are becoming more and more readily available for that population. And this type of transportation is a necessity for them. And so I'm all for, you know, whatever you need to do from the standpoint. I'm an environmentalist, so to speak, but Raleigh has always maintained a very heavy, dense tree population, despite the growth of people coming into the area. And so I would love to see more of a balance in place of becoming a metropolitan city if we're going to compete, as well as maintaining that balance of that ecosystem that's necessary to have a healthy city, climate-wise, you know, quality of water and air. So I think that can be achieved, but also taking in consideration the sensitivity behind people living in the area that see this coming now, and the necessity has been there for years. Now that things are changing, that the landscape of their neighborhoods that they knew are changing, now this comes and it's being drawn out in the heart of their community, and whatever mistakes or whatever success or failures that come into play, it comes at the expense of going straight through their neighborhood. And again, that's just some of the sentiment that I've heard from people within the area. And city definitely needs to be sensitive to that issue.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I definitely understand that sentiment. And that's something we're going to work really hard on. That's what this process is for, is to make sure that it's benefiting existing residents. That, I mean, already right now, we know that affordability in this part of town is an issue. Displacement's occurring. Even if there were no project, I think this is still a really important issue. This gives us a chance to take a really hard look at it and think about what kind of regulatory changes, what kind of city investments we can use to minimize displacement, because it's absolutely crucial. I don't think anybody is going to feel good about a transit investment that doesn't benefit a broad spectrum of residents in terms of race and income, and that isn't able to be enjoyed by existing residents. And so mentioned a couple tools that we'll be able to explore in this process. Another one I would mention is something called the equity fund. And that's the concept of using, as new homes and workplaces are built along this corridor, using that additional property tax revenue, not to go all directly into the city's general fund, but to be plowed right back into equity projects along New Bern Avenue. And so I know one obvious one would be more support for housing affordability, but there could be others as well, support for community groups, local businesses, telling the history and culture of the area, lots of things. So not to get too much into the details, but just to say that that's at the core of this project, is to make sure that it's benefiting existing residents. And in terms of this one going first, that's true. The other ones, though, they're right on the heels. So we'll be having the same kind of conversations, and design work is underway along Western Boulevard towards Cary. So it's really, I would visualize it more as a whole system that's going in across all parts of Raleigh. To the question about ADA and riders, I know Mila can speak to this more directly. I know the stations are being designed to be accessible to all riders. Maybe Mila, you can, if there's any relevant details, can share some of the design details that you're looking at as the stations are being and buses are being worked on.
Yes, all stations and buses, they must be ADA accessible, because obviously it's the right thing to do, but also we are using federal grants, and that's a requirement associated with federal grant. Everything that we touch with the project must be ADA accessible. As far as ADA, serving ADA population, we also have a program called Go Raleigh Access. Essentially a taxi-based service where clients can book a taxi and arrive at that. So we had that model in existence for many years, and that's available today without having to wait for BIT.
So, hello, everybody. Excuse me. I want to echo a lot of the comments that were made about saving trees. I also am very interested in having sidewalks in our neighborhoods to get to, if there's going to be a new sidewalk on New Bern Avenue, so that we could actually use that. I would take the bus if it didn't take me so long to get to the western side of town. I work at NC State, and it takes me half an hour to get there if I was going to ride the bus. So it would be nice to have to be more efficient and not have to get in my car and drive 15 minutes to the other side of town. I am concerned about density of development. I mean, we need more density if the BRT is going to work. And it sounds like the train has already left the station on that. We could argue whether we want it or not. I think we need to be concerned about height limits in certain areas. In particular, like we don't want large buildings towering over certain areas on New Bern Avenue. Longview Gardens is, we all have, we're fortunate, but we moved here because we like the larger lots, and we provide quality environment for a lot of animals too. I mean, it's not just us. So if we have development along New Bern Avenue, I mean, we need to make sure that I don't know if the word is gradated, but so that it's not towering, so that we just don't feel like we've come out of our lovely neighborhood and into downtown, Cameron Village, or areas in there where you've got these towering new high rises, and then you've got small houses next to them. I think that will be important if we can, target that. And we have a portion of New Bern Avenue that's historically Black owned businesses. We need to make sure that we protect those areas. However, we need to do that with zoning. The Longview Gardens also has an overlay district, and it's the King Charles Neighborhood Overlay District that there's a maximum amount of density that can go here. And I'd like to make sure that that is maintained as much as it can be maintained, because it's important for all of us that live here.
Those are great comments. Thank you. And again, a lot of what this project is going to explore and have conversations about. So we've hit the end of the time, but I want to see if there were any last questions. We'll also be doing an additional session on Wednesday. I dropped a link in the chat to the project page, which has links to a link to the survey. And you can also sign up for, I would strongly encourage you, also on that project page, you can sign up for emailed updates. So you'll receive a notice when we get to those late summer workshops, for instance. But also in the meantime, you can absolutely feel free to reach out to me or the other staff members on the call. We are more than happy to have additional conversations. If you'd like us to come and talk with your neighborhood or your church, we're glad to do so as well. Just want to be available to answer questions throughout this process. So I'm not seeing any other questions. I appreciate everybody taking the time to be here tonight and your interest in this project. And it's been valuable hearing from you and your perspectives and the questions and issues you brought up. That's what we need to hear as we move forward. So I appreciate it and look forward to working with all of you as this project goes forward. Thanks. Have a good evening.